The National Treasury is calling for public comment on its latest policy review on the taxation of alcoholic beverages. One of the key proposals is the implementation of the minimum unit pricing, which is seen as a crucial strategy in combating binge drinking. Another key aspect is the revision on how excise is calculated by different types of beverages. Comments on this policy document will inform the budget changes for 2025. Now, for some perspective on this, we speak to project lead for the alcohol harm reduction campaign at the DG Murray Trust, Zimasa Mpemnyama, and CEO of the South African Liquor Brand Owners Association, Kurt Moore. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us this morning. So the policy review builds on the previous excise tax policy that was published in 2014. And some of just the broad discussions within this document is the changes in the regulatory landscape, the prevalence of alcohol consumption, and also just other administrative policy considerations amongst a few other things. Zimasa, how does the alcohol harms reduction campaign align with the objectives of the National Treasury's review of the alcohol taxation? What specific changes are you advocating for?
Good morning, Katlego, and thank you for having me on the show. So first of all, I think not only just the DG Murray Trust, but other activists and civil society actors in the space of alcohol harms are very pleased with the developments that the National Treasury has made within this space and within excise taxes, and in recognizing some of the cries that the space and the activists and the civil society space has been calling for in regulating alcohol, but also using taxation and minimum unit pricing as a tool to curb alcohol harm in South Africa. Another good thing that we've seen from this policy review is how the National Treasury relies a lot on evidence-based solutions to excise taxing. They rely a lot on international outreach and on international solutions from different countries across the world. And these are the things that we've been advocating for a long time. We believe this kind of shift and change in taxation is a long time coming. And we are pleased as well that the National Treasury is looking at minimum unit pricing in contention and in tandem with excise taxes to curb alcohol harm. And the nice thing is that the National Treasury recognizes that excise taxes are not the only thing that will curb alcohol harm in South Africa, that you need different tools within Treasury, but also that you need different departments within government to be able to move towards changing legislation and changing policy to curb alcohol harm in South Africa. Another nice thing in the document that we've been advocating for is the recognition that in South Africa we do have a binge drinking problem. That's the first step. And in order for us to change this binge drinking problem, we need to use policy and we need to use government as a tool to shift policy so that we can shift the attitudes and behaviors of South Africans. And this recognition by the National Treasury and their shifts that they are making in the taxation is something that is welcome in the civil society space.
Right. So, Kurt, what then is the stance of the South African Liquor Brand Owners Association on these proposed changes? What concerns do you have? And maybe particularly just touching on that minimum unit pricing aspect of things.
Katlego, good morning, and thank you also for having me. I think from an industry perspective, I am a trade association representing the interests of spirits producers and importers. I'll still need to consult and get a definitive view on my members' position on this piece of policy. But the challenges that Zimasa mentioned about alcohol abuse are things that we as industry are also concerned of. We believe in targeted interventions. We have programs that are industry funded, focusing on the prevention of underage drinking, the reduction of drinking and driving, as well as FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. These policies are what we term, these nationwide policies are blunt instruments. They don't target the heavy drinkers, the binge drinkers that Zimasa was talking about. What tends to happen is that your moderate consumers are more reactive to price increases, whereas your heavy and binge drinkers are less price sensitive. So they will find that alcohol elsewhere. And the trouble is, in the South African context, they tend to find that alcohol in the illicit market. Now, the illicit market, studies that we've conducted, operates at about 43%. So that's almost half the price of legal products. They don't pay taxes. SARS is losing at least 11.3 billion rand. Illicit trade is about 22% of the market, and we believe is growing. And we're concerned that these population-based strategies are actually going to have unintended consequences of promoting the illicit trade in alcohol. The policy does touch on minimum unit pricing. As an industry, we're concerned that the putting minimum unit pricing in place will actually just increase the margins for these illicit operators. They'll continue to be richer and become more powerful. And we know that organized crime is also involved. So these are some of the challenges with minimum unit pricing, if that's the route that we want to go. I just wanted to, in closing, on this particular issue, I think from an industry perspective, we have to be concerned about discussions in the discussion document about increasing excise and then just creating a safer or more profitable space for illicit traders.
I mean, Zimasa, Kurt raises a very pivotal point there in terms of previous excise tax has not really reduced that scourge of binge drinking amongst those that possibly have that problem. What then do you think is the solution in people that then resort to illicit alcohol within the market?
Sure. So I think some of the things that Kurt raises are actually dealt with in the document and also are dealt with in the research that is used in the document that DGMT has also commissioned. So there are multiple studies that show that you cannot just use excise tax as a measure to curb alcohol harm reduction, right? So you need to use excise tax alongside minimum unit pricing, and the minimum unit pricing is a tool that we've been advocating for because it is shown that it curbs the drinking of it caps the price of alcohol at a certain price so that the heaviest drinkers don't get access to alcohol because of how much it has curbed that price. So the idea that moderate drinkers will be targeted and that heavier drinkers won't feel the pinch of minimum unit pricing is false. And that has been debunked by research that is in this document, but also has been commissioned. And also minimum unit pricing, because of the way of the mechanism it uses to increase the price of alcohol, it also targets young consumers of alcohol, which Kurt does not touch into, that we also have an issue of people that are drinking from a very young age, and they're able to access drinking because of the fact that South Africa has very low prices of alcohol, specifically beer and others. So this then curbs the drinking of very low, of minors, and it targets heavy drinkers. And this is there in the studies, this is there in the literature.
So Kurt,
but also there,
yes, you may continue, Zimasa.
But what I wanted to mention is something that we've been advocating for a while, is that you can't just use excise taxes plus minimum unit pricing and hope for the best, right? What Kurt is mentioning is true, that there is a illicit market of alcohol in South Africa, and that when you do make this sort of shifts, there's a possibility of rising in the illicit market. This is why we've been advocating for the fact that you need a multi-government approach that includes policing, that includes correctional services, that includes the Department of Health, that makes sure that you target all these other things that will possibly spring out of making certain changes. But also lastly, that when you have a whole of government approach and you take alcohol harm seriously and you put public health at the forefront, you can then make changes in legislation that put people first. The point here is to prioritize public health.
Most
The
certainly.
point is to prioritize the health of the people that are most suffering in South Africa, not only as the individual drinker, but as society at large.
Kurt, this is open for public comment, which will obviously inform the budget changes for 2025. What role do you think industry players such as yourselves and public health advocates should play, not only in the public comment process, but also in educating the public in how they will be commenting during this process?
Yeah, we will, as you rightfully said, we will participate in this process. I think, as Zimasa mentioned, we believe that we require an all of society approach. Industry has a role to play. NGOs have a role to play. Government and law enforcement has a particular role to play in addressing the challenges of alcohol abuse. Our concerns about the policy that is in place is that, as I mentioned earlier, it could have an impact and result in an increase in illicit trade. We're all for international benchmarks. We're all for learning from other jurisdictions. But even the WHO admits that whatever policies you put in place has to be considered within the local context. And the local context in South Africa is illicit trade is there. It's increasing ever more. And we don't want to be sitting back in a few years' time and saying the WHO's policies were successful. We've managed to reduce alcohol consumption because we're monitoring what's happening with the legal space, and in the illegal space, it's increasing, and we don't address the challenges that Zimasa mentioned earlier.
And Kurt, what's your take in terms of what you believe could be the problem with the alcohol taxation that could affect the economy, and particularly in terms of employment and revenue generation within your sector?
Well, as you've seen, I've just recently been to the Treasury website, and I don't know if it's has been updated, but a few weeks ago, they're about 12% below their targeted revenue generation. And that clearly tells you, and that's for spirits, that clearly tells you that the taxation strategies, even that government is currently using, is promoting the illicit trade, which is why they are missing their revenue generation targets. Yeah, as an industry, we help to create jobs. As an industry, we are wanting to work with the government in terms of its development strategies. We also want to work with government in dealing with alcohol-related harm.
Lastly, Zimasa, of course, in terms of your own expectations and outcomes, is with regards to the health of South Africans, especially those that participate in binge drinking. How do you envision the balance between public health and just the industry interests that should be achieved?
Right. So we do acknowledge the fact that the alcohol industry does contribute to South African society. But what research shows is that the harm that is caused by alcohol in our society is far greater than what we benefit in terms of jobs and in terms of the economy, because our infrastructure, because of road accidents, is suffering, because of how fetal alcohol syndrome is affecting the futures of young children, because of the fact that community violence is increasing at night specifically and on weekends because of alcohol consumption, because of the fact that GBV is on a spike, and part of the connections of GBV is alcohol consumption. I could go on and on and on. And there are studies that show that the weight of the financial burden of alcohol in our society has a far greater risk in terms of public health than the cost. As a society, we need to find different ways of engaging with alcohol. We need to change our behaviors. We need to change the way in which we center alcohol in terms of festivities. We're going into the festive season. We need to shift the ways in which we partake in alcohol in things like the festive season, because it costs us our lives, it costs us productivity at work, is part of the things. And so when we engage with this policy, we'll definitely note those things down, and we'll share our concerns with National Treasury, and we'll urge them on to continue in the path that they are taking, to make sure that they are prioritizing public health, and to urge them to pull different departments in that have a stake in this policy and in alcohol harm, and to make sure that public health is centered. But yes, we take into consideration the different stakeholders that have a stake in this, but at the center and at the core of governance and at the core of our government system should be the health of South Africans at the forefront and the future of our children. We need to intervene now, and we believe that this taxation policy is the step in the right direction.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Zimasa and Kurt, and for your contributions and the stances that both your organizations are taking on this matter. That was project lead for the alcohol harm reduction campaign at the DG Murray Trust, Zimasa Mpemnyama, and CEO of the South African Liquor Brand Owners Association, Kurt Moore.